Okay, Hunter Exotic Armor PvE specific tier list. I want to mention, by the way, if I put like an exotic you like at a low tier, I'm not saying you're not allowed to use it or that you shouldn't use it. You know, this isn't really about what exotics are fun or about what exotics put a smile on your face. It's about their effectiveness across all the different activities in the game. I'm not really looking for an exotic to like, it doesn't have to be good in raids and GMs and solo flawless dungeons and all of that. If like an exotic is just stand out in one particular category, to me that still is classified as an S tier exotic in my opinion. So that's the angle I'm going at this from, and we'll just do them in order. So starting out with Aeon Swift, I believe it is called for hunters. I think Titans are Aeon Safe and Warlocks are Aeon Soul, but Aeon Gauntlet exotic. Strictly, you know, we're kind of primarily going to be looking at this from the Sective Insight angle, where if you use a finisher on an orange bar enemy, you make special ammo for your entire team. If you use a finisher on a mini boss, so like a champion or any enemy with a little triangle icon next to its health bar, you make heavy for your entire team. To me, the simple fact that you can continuously generate ammo for all of your teammates, especially in Grandmaster Nightfalls, that you can have heavy on deck anytime you finish a champion, to me that is immediate entry into the S tier category. It's completely in a class of its own in terms of the utility it brings to a team, and it's unrivaled in that category. Another thing I want to mention too, by the way, is I'm just doing it based on the tiers, so it's not necessarily like the order within the tiers doesn't really matter directly. Like this doesn't mean that Swift is better than Assassin's Cowl. I just think that they're both S tier exotics. But Assassin's Cowl is next, and I would also put Assassin's Cowl definitively in the S tier. For me, it excels in lower end PvE content. You get a full HP heal on every single melee final kill, which once you get combination blow stacking, that's super, super easy. And you go invisible on every single kill, which makes it good in high end content. I know there's a lot of people that think that Assassin's Cowl doesn't really fly in high end content because it just doesn't bring enough damage to the table. But when you pair it with a 1-2 punch shotgun, which if you're running an Arc Hunter melee based build, you should probably have a 1-2 punch shotgun. This thing will still one shot, two shot, maybe three shot in some circumstances, pretty much every single enemy in the game that's not a boss. It'll still absolutely destroy champions. And that's not even how you really want to use Assassin's Cowl primarily anyway. The main way you use Assassin's Cowl in higher end content is you use the invisibility and one hit kills to mop up all of the weaker enemies in an area. So you kind of punch a weak enemy to get your buff stacking, gives you the invisibility, and then you use that invisibility to safely run to the next enemy, punch that enemy, and you mop up all the lower priority targets that you kill in one hit so that you can then isolate the tanky targets, stun them, and take them out without anybody else being anywhere near you and being able to threaten you in any capacity. So that's kind of the ideal gameplay loop of Assassin's Cowl in higher end content. You can also obviously run Gathering Storm, so it works in raid encounters too, because even though you're not using Assassin's Cowl for boss DPS, Gathering Storm's an amazing DPS super. For me, Assassin's Cowl, another S tier exotic. And by the way, if you want an easy way to farm some god stat rolls of these S tier exotic armor pieces, my Discord server has a channel in it called Daily Lost Sectors that automatically uploads at every daily reset that tells you everything about that day's exotic lost sector. It tells you what it is, where it is, the exotic armor piece reward, the threat, the surge, all the modifiers, the champions, and stuff like that. So it just makes it a lot easier to farm out these god roll exotic armor pieces. So if that sounds good to you, link is in the description down below. While you're down there, might as well click subscribe because it'll make you feel good. Thanks. Back to the tier list. Nighthawk, I'm kind of struggling where to put this one because in the inception of the game, Nighthawk was obviously amazing. It was some of the best damage in the entire game. Might have been the best damage in the entire game, but we've come a long way. Obviously, you're going to have other hunter exotic options that are going to single-handedly beat Nighthawk in every category. There was a time where just doing the 3-shot golden gun and hitting precision on all 3 shots out-damaged the one massive shot from Nighthawk. I don't know if it's still like that, but to me, Nighthawk is just not a really good option because you have other exotic options that literally do the exact same thing that Nighthawk does, but miles better. So for me, I would probably, I'm between C and D here tier. I would probably put it in the D tier because like I said, if I can't think of a single situation in which I would want Nighthawk over something like Star Eater Scales, then I don't see a justification for ever equipping it in any capacity. So Nighthawk, unfortunately, it used to be like an S tier exotic in D1 days and like early D2 days. It's definitely fallen quite far from its original standing. Next up is Foetracer. Allows you to deal bonus damage to weaker health enemies and visually marks targets that you damage, I believe, and then a small benefit to airborne effectiveness. To me, this is strictly a PvP exotic. I don't see any use case whatsoever for this in PvE. You know, compared to some of the other options that you could have. So I would honestly put Foetracer in D as well. I don't ever see a situation where Foetracer going to be useful at all. Frosties, I definitely don't think is an S tier exotic. I think it's a good exotic, and I've recommended it in builds in the past, specifically for Stasis Hunter, but I don't think its ability regeneration from sprinting is so good that I would put it in a class of its own. I'm kind of between A and B. I kind of hover a little bit more towards A because, like I said, I do recommend it for Stasis Hunter. And the reason I recommend it for Stasis Hunter is it kind of fills a gap for, more passive boosts where, if you have a build that's all about ability regeneration and maybe there's not a whole lot of ability regeneration built into that kit, or there's not any exotics that specifically complement the abilities within that kit. So you have like exotics like Omnioculus, which is specific to Void, Graviton Forfeit, which is specific to Void. You don't really have a ton of exotics that are specific to Stasis that encourage ability regeneration, and ability regeneration exotics are usually pretty good. So I feel like I'm comfortable putting Frosties in the A tier. They don't do anything mind-blowing in terms of their ability regeneration, but they definitely fill a gap that is not really filled by anything else when it comes to certain builds. Next up is Gemini Jester. Gemini Jester, when you dodge, it disorients enemies and temporarily removes their radar. So if you want the dregs to not have radar, then I guess Gemini Jester is really, really good. But I'm pretty sure dregs don't have radar anyway, and you can disorient enemies with like 18 other ways in the game. So I don't really see this ever being useful in any capacity. So that's another D tier for me. Graviton Forfeits. I think Graviton Forfeit is actually really, really good. There's 3 like well-known invisibility hunter exotics in Graviton Forfeit, Omnioculus, and 6 Coyote, and they all ultimately kind of do the same thing. They achieve the same end result in basically having you invisible infinitely if you play their gameplay loops right. They just kind of have a different means of getting there. One is more dodges, one's more smokes, and then one's more extended timers and ability regeneration. And any exotic that can make you invisible permanently if you want to me is invaluable, because if you're in an activity like a Grandmaster Nightfall and you need to stay safe while enemies, move to the other side of the map while you get your teammates res, like that's, that completely saves a run. That saves you from a wipe, saves you from going to orbit and having to rerun the activity. I think invisibility is probably the strongest mechanic in endgame PvE where survivability is the focus. Grandmasters is the pure embodiment of just survival. I think invisibility and suspend from Strand are probably the 2 absolute best things that you can have in activities like those. So I honestly put Graviton Forfeit in the S tier because if you're playing it right, you can't die. It's not possible to die with Graviton Forfeit if you're playing correctly. So that's an S tier exotic for me. Gwisin Vest refunds, or what's the specific definition of Gwisin Vest? It was a Forsaken exotic. Each Spectral Blade kill you make before going into stealth will restore more of your super energy. I don't know who's using Spectral Blades in PvE. There's like 800 better roaming super options for PvE, and Hunter has a few of them. You should definitely be using like Arc Strider before you ever consider using Gwisin Vest in PvE. Gwisin Vest is honestly going to go into D tier for me. I don't really see a situation in which you should ever use Gwisin Vest. What exactly does Khepri's Sting do? Punching someone with full melee energy will instantly cast your Smoke Bomb. Okay. Your Smoke Bombs deal increased damage, regenerate more quickly when stuck to a surface, and grant you True Sight after damaging a target. For a PvE situation, you don't really need True Sight that much, honestly. True Sight is much more of a PvP thing. I mean, like True Sight can be kind of useful in PvE, I guess, in certain situations. But to me, Khepri's is trying to achieve that invisibility power fantasy, and there's just a ton more exotics that do a way better job than Khepri's Sting at achieving that maximum uptime invisibility power fantasy. So Khepri's Sting, I feel like, is just a D tier, because why would you ever run Khepri's Sting when you can run something like Graviton Forfeit instead? Next up is Knucklehead Radar, which provides radar while you're aiming and enhances your radar resolution while crouched. I don't really see a situation in which this is ever going to be useful to you in a PvE situation. Again, definitely exotic built specifically for PvP. So Knucklehead Radar, another D tier situation. Liar's Handshake is an interesting one because on paper, Liar's Handshake seems really, really, really good. It kind of competes with Assassin's Cowl for, which exotic is ultimately better for Arc Hunter. The problem with Liar's Handshake is in lower end content, the extra damage that Liar's Handshake provides is completely unnecessary, because with a 3x combination blow in Assassin's Cowl, you're already one-shotting every single enemy, so you don't really need the extra damage from Liar's Handshake. It's just kind of pointless. You would rather have the invisibility and full heal on every single kill. So then you look more on the more difficult content side of things, and you're like, okay, well, Liar's Handshake makes a little sense, right? Champions are a little tankier. These, bigger, beefier enemies were in contest mode. They're a little tankier. And and you get healing on hit as opposed to healing on kills. So theoretically, you have a bit more survivability against tankier targets. However, lacking invisibility in those really, really difficult activities, in my opinion, is much more of a detriment than lacking a 40 HP heal on every other melee attack with Liar's Handshake. That's how much the cross counter heals you. It's 40 HP. Additionally, I don't know if it's bugged or not, but Liar's Handshake has really bad synchronization with the general Arc Hunter kit because you run Lethal Current on Arc Hunter, which is where if you dodge and you punch something after you dodge, it'll do like a damaging aftershock and blow up and hit the enemy. That counts as melee damage and it consumes the cross counter buff, but the cross counter buff doesn't actually buff that aftershock damage. So it's kind of wasted. So you have to like go out of your way to actually proc cross counter, which feels really, really weird. And since, like I said before, you're probably going to be running a 1-2 punch shotgun with an Arc Hunter build, when you're using Liar's Handshake, you only get a 40% buff from 1-2 punch when you are hitting it with the cross counter melee, whereas you get a 100% buff when you don't have cross counter. Even when you have combination blow ×3, you get a 100% buff, but if you combine 1-2 punch cross counter, it's only 40%. So overall, Liar's Handshake still is doing a little bit more damage than Assassin's Cowl, but it's not so much more damage, in my opinion, that it's worth giving up a full HP heal and invisibility on every single final blow. And in addition to that, damage isn't really your biggest concern in these endgame activities like Grandmaster Nightfall's. Survivability is. So I think if you're looking for an exotic to pair with Arc Hunter, you're going to want something that's going to buff up your survivability, not something that's going to buff up your damage. So I don't think Liar's Handshake is horrible. Like, I wouldn't recommend never using it because there are still some situations like solo flawless dungeon bosses you can maybe see it being good for. So I do see certain situations for it, but like 90% of the time, I think Assassin's Cowl is way more useful than Liar's Handshake. So I'll give Liar's Handshake a B. I'm kind of between B and C. I think B is a little generous, but we'll set it there. Lucky Pants is next, and Lucky Pants, I don't think anyone has ever talked about. You know, this is kind of the first time we've ever had a conversation about Lucky Pants because I recently dropped a Lucky Pants build video. I don't think it's an S tier exotic. I don't think it's like that crazy. However, with the 20% hand cannon buff that we just received, I think 7 days ago, maybe not 7 days ago from the release of this video, but 7 days ago from right now, hand cannons are kind of good in PvE now. And surprisingly, you can take hand cannons into Grandmaster Nightfalls right now and kill champions in like 3 seconds with an infinite ammo primary weapon with Lucky Pants. So I'm also comfortable putting Lucky Pants in the A tier because not only do they, you know, completely shred champions, but they do it with infinite ammo weapons, and they actually do pretty solid boss damage too. Again, with infinite ammo weapons, which in an activity like GMs, where you know, it's not too difficult to run out of heavy ammo or run out of special, that can be something that's pretty valuable. Next up is Lucky Raspberry, which is kind of an interesting exotic. I feel like a lot of people don't know how it actually works. The way Lucky Raspberry works is, what are they called? Arc Bolt Grenades, I believe. Normally, Arc Bolt Grenades hit 3 enemies. Lucky Raspberry allows them to hit 4, and it gives you an additive chance to refund your grenade based on every enemy that is hit, 25% per enemy. So, for example, if you throw a Arc Bolt Grenade with Lucky Raspberry and it hits 1 enemy, you have a 25% chance to refund that grenade. If you hit 2 enemies, it's 50. If you hit 3, it's 75% chance. And again, that's chance. You don't get 75% of your grenade back. You have a 75% chance to get all of your grenade back. And then obviously, if you hit 4 enemies, get a hit with every single chain, you get the full grenade back. So it's not really good in endgame PvE. Like, Arc Bolts just aren't really doing enough damage and it's way too circumstantial. But it's kind of a goofy exotic. It's, you know, it's kind of fun to run in like lower end content, run around in strikes. So I wouldn't say never use it, but you know, its situations are limited and it's not particularly great. So I'd say C tier is a good spot for Lucky Raspberry. Next up is Mechaneers Tricksleeves, which I know they do something with sidearms, but I'm not exactly sure what they do. Increases sidearm ready and reload speed while you're critically wounded. Swapping to a sidearm increases its damage. I don't really like any exotic that requires you to almost die for it to give you whatever its perk is. So I can't really see a situation where you should ever use Mechaneers Tricksleeves, not only because you kind of have to put yourself in a bad position to get the damage buff benefits, but also because sidearms aren't really good in the PvE meta at the current moment. I mean, like, can use sidearms and, you know, use whatever you want, right? But even if you were using a sidearm, I would definitely recommend a lot of other exotics over Mechaneers Tricksleeves. So I'm going to put Mechaneers Tricksleeves in D tier. Oathkeepers, I believe, increase airborne effectiveness when using a bow and allow you to indefinitely hold the bow drawstring. So like usually with a bow, if you hold it for too long, the arrow will automatically fire. Oathkeepers just lets you hold it permanently. To me, this is so incredibly useless. I can't think of a single situation where you can justify having having your exotic armor slot occupied by something that lets you hold an arrow permanently when you can just let go of the arrow and just pull another one, or sprint to cancel your currently drawn arrow and then re-pull it. Like, make the arrows draw faster, make the arrows do more damage. It's bows. Like, people aren't really using bows like a ton. I guess people are using Wish Ender and Grandmasters, but like, this exotic is in a brutal spot. And if I recall correctly, when it released, it did actually increase the draw time of bows and arrows, right? But it was like bugged, and Bungie couldn't figure out how to fix the bug. So instead of fixing the bug, they just deleted that component of the exotic armor piece. I don't really know. To me, D tier exotic, don't really have to think about it that much. Ophidia Spathe, 2 melee charges, short and sweet. Can be kind of good with Solar Hunter. There's a lot of exotics that are a lot better for Solar Hunter, and there's a lot of ways that you can refund your melee. So like having 2 charges isn't great, but like, you know, if you like the idea of like throwing as many knives as humanly possible, could be something that's like kind of fun and lower end content. So I can give that a C tier rating. Moving on, Orpheus Rig gives you super energy back if you're using Deadfall Tether based on how many enemies it hits, and gives you a 3rd volley of Mobius Quiver. I'm torn between Orpheus Rig. It's a really good exotic because Orpheus Rig, you know, increases your zone control a lot if you're using Deadfall, and it makes the duration of Mobius Quiver as long as Deadfall because each volley lasts for 6 seconds, I believe. So 6 times 3 is 18 seconds total, which normally you only have 12 seconds total of Mobius, and Deadfall is an 18-second super. So you can get the same duration as Deadfall while having more damage because obviously the hits from the 3 tether bolts are going to do damage on their own. So it can actually be really good in a lot of boss DPS situations. So I kind of love Orpheus for that. And you know what? I'm going to stick Orpheus in S tier. And the reason I'm going to stick Orpheus in S tier is because you don't have to have Orpheus equipped for the entire encounter. So for example, if you're running a raid encounter, you can have a different exotic equipped like Aeons. And then as you're walking into the DPS phase where you know you're going to use your tether, you just throw on Orpheus, use the tether, and then switch back to another exotic. So not only is Orpheus providing a lot of really, really good benefits, but you don't even have to have the exotic equipped the entire time to maximize those benefits, allowing you to throw on a different exotic that is going to maximize your efficiency in other categories of the encounter that you're running. So to me, Orpheus Rig, S tier exotic. Raiden Flux is probably the best Arc Staff super exotic. This thing was insane in vanilla. I don't know if people remember, but back in the day, you would, for the Whisper of the Worm mission, a lot of people would use Raiden Flux. A lot of people would use Raiden Flux, and they would pop Arc Staff, and they would run at the bosses, and they could wipe out like 1.5 of the 3 bosses with the Raiden Flux alone, which was a pretty big deal because hits increase your damage and increase the duration. So you had this really long Arc Staff that was just hitting like a truck. So I don't know. It's kind of lost its time in the limelight. I think in year 1, I would have rated it an S tier exotic. Right now, I'm sitting kind of between B and A, but leaning a little bit more towards B. Not necessarily because the Raiden Flux exotic is bad in and of itself, but because the Arc Strider roaming super is not particularly great in the current sandbox of the game and hasn't been that great for a really long time. So I think I'll throw it in B, but with a couple tweaks to the meta, maybe a buff to Arc Staff, I think it could see itself in A. Okay, Sealed Ahamkara Grasps. I know Sealed Ahamkara Grasps are something to do with, like, you get reload when you do melee damage or something. Dealing melee damage reloads your currently equipped weapon, provides a large benefit to the airborne effect. Whenever I read airborne effectiveness, like, I just kind of immediately fall asleep because I'm like, I'm a PvE player. I don't want to deal with airborne effectiveness. You added it for PvP. I want to keep pretending like airborne effectiveness does not exist. So anytime I read the word airborne effectiveness, I'm like, I don't want anything to do with this exotic. Either way, dealing melee damage reloads your currently equipped weapon, not exotic enough. Like, you're better off using about a whole bunch of other stuff. That one's going D tier. Shards of Galanor, simple and sweet, refunds a lot of Blade Barrage super energy when you get kills with Blade Barrage. This exotic is similar to Orpheus Rig, where you can kind of slap on Shards of Galanor when you're about to throw your Blade Barrage, and then you can switch back to another exotic, you know, after you're done with that. The problem is that there's other exotics that you probably want to have on when you're throwing your Blade Barrage that we'll get to in a second. In an ad clearing situation exclusively, I think Shards can actually be really, really solid. However, in a boss DPS situation, I think they're pretty useless. And usually you're going to use your Blade Barrage in a boss DPS situation. So I'll give this C tier for that one area where it can like be solid for ad clear and give you your Blade Blade Barrage back pretty quickly, or I think it maxes out at like 2%. However, there's better exotics to pair with Blade Barrage. Isn't it hits with Blade Barrage? I believe, yes, actually it is hits with Blade Barrage. However, it doesn't really change the argument because even if you throw it at a boss, you get a maximum of 50% back with the Shards of Galanor. And if you're in like a raid DPS phase, like it's never going to be enough refund to get anywhere near a second Blade Barrage before that DPS phase is up. So I think C tier is a solid spot for Shards. There's just better Blade Barrage exotics. Shinobu's Vow, big buff to skip grenades, improve skip grenade, and you gain an additional skip case. So you get 2 skip grenades. Skip grenade returns energy when it damages enemies. That's very vague. How much does it return when it damages enemies? Can you guys help me out? Most, if not all energy? Okay, that seems pretty solid. However, I feel like skip grenades aren't like packing a ton of damage compared to other grenades like pulse grenades. It's okay, right? It's definitely not really up there, and I feel like the damage of skip grenades isn't huge. So I'm leaning somewhere in the B to C category. I feel like I never see Shinobu's Vow recommended in any like high-end activity in any capacity, and I feel like there's a good reason for that. And while I think it's like really fun to throw a bunch of skip grenades and have them like track all over the place and hit a bunch of enemies, I feel like they're not doing a lot of damage to really compete in any facet of endgame Destiny, and I feel like you're better off running other grenades. So, you know, I know that a lot of people have a lot of fun with Shinobu's Vow, but I feel like C is probably a good spot for them right now, so long as skip grenade damage isn't anything to write home about. Stompies, it's the go fast exotic, slide fast, sprint fast, jump fast, all that good stuff. Not super useful in PvE, but if you're trying to do like shatter skates and stuff like that, or you're trying to get through like jumping puzzles, raids a little faster, maybe you got dinner in 10 minutes and you're trying to finish up the raid, Stompies will get you there a little bit faster. That's good enough for me to put them in the category of, hey, you're probably not going to use them a whole lot in PvE, but they have a use case. So boom. I am not giving Stompies S tier. That's fair, but people will be mad. I mean, look, like I said before, if you disagree with something on my tier list, it's okay. You can still use the exotic, but I'm not going to kid myself and tell myself that Stompies is a better PvE option than Raiden Flux, Liar's Handshake, Frosties, Aeons, Assassin's Cowl, Orpheus. I'm not going to tell myself that Stompies are bringing more to the table in a PvE context than the options that are above it, okay? I know we all came from the Bones of AO origination days, okay? I know we all came from the triple hunter jump as the only way we could get through the King's Wall jumping puzzles. I'm right there with you, okay? And then Stompies was the continuation of that, okay? It's in our lifeblood. It's what made us hunter mains, is that we were better equipped to complete the jumping puzzle. I get it. But if the only advocacy for an exotic in PvE is that it's going to help you get through a jumping puzzle a little bit better, I'm sorry, but that's a C tier exotic. Much love to the Stompies users, but I think C is pretty appropriate for it. Bombardiers. Bombardiers give you various benefits on your dodge depending on what subclass you have equipped. If you're on Arc, it blinds, it releases like a little bomb, and then the bomb explodes. If you're on Arc, the bomb blinds. If you're on Solar, it scorches. If you're on Void, it suppresses, which suppresses actually pretty good. Blind's pretty good as well, actually. I guess Blind and Suppress are really good. Stasis slows, which is kind of eh. And then Strand is Sever, which I believe just nerfs the damage that enemies do. So for me, Bombardiers are decent on Void and Arc, but they're kind of bad on the other subclasses. They're pretty bad. They're not great. However, like I can see a justification for memeing around with them in like lower end content, but I would definitely never use them in anything above like goofing around in playlist strikes. So I'll give them a C tier because they do stuff, and that stuff can sometimes, very little times, but sometimes be useful in PvE content on like, you know, Knucklehead Radar, but they're not good. Dragon Shadow, when you dodge, immediately reloads all your weapons, and I believe gives you a handling speed boost. This exotic, I wouldn't say it's good. I struggle with exotics like Bombardiers and Dragon Shadow because I don't really know if I should put them in D or C tier. To me, they're like kind of interchangeable to a certain degree. You can make the argument for like, yeah, well, it empowers all your weapons. It's all about the gunplay. It makes the gunplay feel super smooth. And it's like, okay, I guess I kind of get that. But at the same time, it's like there's exotics that completely blow it out of the water. So, I mean, Dragon Shadow also gives a pretty solid stat boost, so you can get your dodge back more often. So it kind of like loops into itself. And I guess that's kind of good. And then if you're using it on like Void, it kind of helps you get your invis dodge up a little more often. So I don't know. I'd say you can put it in C tier. Just know the C and D tier is honestly kind of interchangeable to a certain degree on this tier list. I wouldn't read too much into like oh, you really put Dragon Shadow above Khepri Sting. It's like, they're both pretty bad. Okay. Getting back to good exotics, 6 Coyote, that's an S tier exotic. I don't even have to think about that. It plays into the permanent invisibility loop if you're using it on on Void. It's insane on Strand because it gives you double class ability, which means double dive, which means double suspends. And honestly, that's the only argument I really need to put in S tier, to be completely honest. Like I said, any exotic that allows you to be permanently, infinitely invisible is probably an S tier exotic, because if you play it right, it's impossible to die. And I said before when I was talking about Graviton Forfeit, two best things in endgame content that is, all about survivability is invisibility and suspend. And 6 Coyote plays really, really well into both of those. So easy S tier exotic in my opinion. Wormhusk Crown, heal on dodge. And I believe a little bit of overshield, actually. Let me confirm that. Dodging gives a small health and shield bump. So I don't think overshield, actually. But, you get a little chunk of healing on Wormhusk. Restores 67 HP on class ability usage. So a third. Definitely not an S tier exotic. I feel like you're probably better off with a lot of invisibility exotics over Wormhusk. And there's so many ways to heal in the game now that I feel like a 67 HP bump is really not that great. I wouldn't put it in C tier though. I don't think it's like as useless as things like Dragon Shadow, Lucky Raspberry, and stuff like that. Not useless, but I don't think it's down there. I think B tier is healthy for it. I think it's like a low B tier though. I don't think it's like, if B tier is like, you got like Raiden Flux and Liars up here, and then Wormhusk is a little more down here. Young Ahamkara's Spine. For me, S tier exotic. The damage rotation that you can get off with Young Ahamkara's Spine is crazy. You're throwing, like, not only are you launching grenades nonstop, you're getting your melee back nonstop, slinging off a bunch of blade barrages, but it blows up everything in low end content. It blows up everything in raids. You can do insane boss damage with it. It blows up everything in GMs, and it's insanely fun to use. It's like, in my opinion, one of the most fun exotics in the entire game in terms of like the gameplay loop that it promotes. So Young Ahamkara's Spine, if you haven't given it a whirl yet, like take it into a dungeon, like run a solo dungeon with it, you'll be like, whoa, this thing is like hilariously fun. And the sheer fact that it makes it so that you can't damage yourself with trip mines, if you could damage yourself with trip mines, this would be a D tier exotic, because all this exotic would do is you would just get yourself like sent up into the sky all day long with trip mines. But since it makes it so that your trip mines don't hurt you, insane S tier in my opinion. Raiju's Harness, I believe, makes it so that your super drains more slowly, or it doesn't consume super energy on Arc Staff when you're doing the guard. Deactivate Arc Staff early. Guarding with Arc Staff consumes energy more slowly when not attacking, and guarding does not consume extra super energy. How many of y'all are out here in PvE doing the guard with the Arc Staff? There was a grand total of 0 people watching this video right now, I am convinced, that are using the guard Arc Staff in PvE. D tier. And you know what? Just for good measure, we're going to skip ahead a little bit. Blight Ranger, make orbs on guard. First of all, when it released, it didn't even work. It was like disabled for like the first month of its existence in the game. And honestly, it should have been left disabled. So you know what? Hold up. We're going to do a little something. We're going to do add a row below, and we're going to call this one Z tier. Blight Ranger goes in Z tier. Athrys Embrace. I don't know exactly what Athrys is. It's like, yeah, weighted knife gains second bounce, rapid precision hits with your weapons, grant weighted knife a significant damage bonus, and the ability to stun unshielded combatants for a short time. Good against unstoppable champions as well. Yeah, there's so many ways to stun unstoppable champions, and there's so many better options for solar ability damage. Like, any situation where you're like, oh, Athrys Embrace, like I could use Athrys Embrace, have a big throwing knife. Dude, just use Young Ahamkara's Spine instead. Trip mine, throwing knife, a second trip mine, boom, that dude's dead. Like, it's so much easier. So Athrys probably DT. I never see a situation where you should use Athrys. Mask of Bakris. The only really PvE situation where this is good in is that it buffs arc damage. And like, I guess I could see that being good for like a DPS phase. If you have like an arc rocket, you do your quick dodge and then you like light off 10 arc rockets. Maybe that can be good. I know people have used Bakris for low mans and raids in the past because it gave them the damage bump that they needed, but I don't. When was the last time you heard someone be like, oh, I'm gonna throw in Bakris so I can do more damage with arc? And like, your dodge does not refund for the entirety of the dodge. Like, that's pretty bad too. I just want to, you have to be on stasis to use Bakris. Replaces your stasis subclass dodge. Oh, that's horrible. Yeah, because then you have to be, okay, never mind. That's awful. I mean, like, you can make the case for like, you're doing a GM. Stasis is actually kind of good in GM. So it's like, maybe you're doing a GM and you're using stasis and you happen, it's an arc surge week. Fine. C tier. That's the best it's gonna. This one, you know, let's pay our respects. Let's pay our respects. Listen. This video will not get anything nerfed, okay? For all of you that are in my comments, oh, thanks a lot for making a build video. Now Bungie's gonna nerf this. There is not a single Bungie employee. Oh, I have to nerf things today. YouTube.com, MacDix. Oh, MacDix said this thing is good. Time to nerf. No, it doesn't happen, okay? We're fine. This thing is like, okay, it's an S tier exotic, but like in my heart. Listen, 2 smoke bombs, so you get that infinite invisibility loop. You get 50% of your smoke bomb back every time you smoke someone. So even in 3-man activities, if you hit both of them, you get the full smoke bomb back, okay? It's like you didn't even use it, except you did use it because they're both invis for like the next 10 seconds, or 7 seconds if they don't have echo persistence. I don't know. You get it back entirely. Boom, refund. You can literally it's wild. It's so good. And the reason I love Omnioculus more than Graviton Forfeit and 6 Coyote for Invis Hunter is because it gives you like 50% damage resistance when you're invisible, and gives that same damage resistance to your allies who you make invisible. So if you have an ally that dies in like a Grandmaster Nightfall, for example, and they're in like a big pack of enemies, or they're right next to the boss or something, you don't have to care. You can run up, res them, immediately do your dive to make them invisible. It doesn't matter if the Light Blade boss takes his action, goes do. If they're high resilience, which in PvE, if you're running anything less than tier 10 resilience, you're kind of throwing, but you know, I digress. If they're high resilience, you give them a 50% damage resist, you can res them right next to a boss, they can get hit, doesn't even matter, they're still alive. It's insane. Oh, it's not OP, Bungie. It's definitely not OP. Omnioculus is in a very balanced state, but it's insane. Omnioculus is the GOAT. My GOAT, at least. Remember, this is my tier list, okay? Make your own tier list. And tweet it at me on Twitter, at MacDixG1 on Twitter. Tweet me your tier list. I'm actually curious. I would love for you guys to make your own tier list and tweet it at me, because I think that would be kind of fun to see them, look at them. Next up, Star Eater Scales. To me, S tier exotic, Star Eater Scales makes some of the Hunter DPS supers some of the best DPS supers in the game, specifically with Blade Barrage and Gathering Storm. Although Gathering Storm, you can only have one Gathering Storm on a boss at a time, because if multiple people put Gathering Storms on a boss, only one of them counts for like the tick damage. It's the same as like pulse grenades and solar grenades and stuff like that, vortex grenades. But this thing juices up Blade Barrage, and it makes Blade Barrage an absolute menace that melts bosses. So Star Eater Scales, S tier, and Star Eater Scales being in S tier is one of the reasons that Celestial Nighthawk is in D tier. I know Celestial Nighthawk in D tier is probably going to be kind of a controversial thing, but like I can't think of a single situation in which you would want to use Celestial Nighthawk Golden Gun over Star Eater Scales Blade Barrage. Like there's nothing that pops into my head that would justify the Nighthawk over Scales. So Scales definitely an S tier. Amazing exotic. Radiant Dance Machines. When you dodge next to an enemy, you get infinite dodges for 5 seconds, I think it is. I know briefly some of the communities said that like Radiant Dance Machines was like a really good option for Strand Hunter, because you could do like your base dodge next to an enemy and then do the suspend air move. You could do like 3 of them in that 5-second period, but you could only do 3. I made a whole spiel about it in my Strand Hunter build video. I'll put in the link down below if you want to hear about it. But the basic gist of it is, if you want to roam around the map and like actually go to different packs of enemies and dive on them, with Radiant Dance Machines in that 5-second period, you can only realistically do like 2 dives, and 6 Coyote is 2 dives available at all times with no activation criteria, and they're always passively recharging in the background. So I don't really see the point of Radiant Dance Machines ever. They have some goofy interactions, and you know, they can be nifty in certain niche scenarios, so I'll put them in C tier, but I think Radiant Dance Machines overall are pretty bad. Renewal Grasps, I feel like are still pretty good. I feel like Renewal Grasps are not as bad as people have maybe made them out to be. They definitely got hurt big time when they got caught in the crossfire because of PvP nerf, because they were terrorizing PvP, but they're still pretty solid in PvE, and especially considering that there's ways that we can build around grenade regeneration so easily with the current new mod system. Innervation for grenade refund on orb pickup, impact induction for grenade refund when you hit an enemy with a melee ability or just a base melee, bomber when you dodge next to an enemy. Like there's so many ways that you can like get large chunks of your grenade back. Massively extended timer doesn't really matter that much. You get a ton of damage resistance from these. They're pretty solid in my personal opinion. I don't think they're A tier solid, but I think you can very comfortably put them in B tier, and maybe with a few tweaks to them if it comes down the line, I think they can easily be an A tier exotic. Caliban's Hand. I believe Caliban's is increased proximity throwing knife regeneration. Your proximity knife scorches targets it damages with its explosions or ignites targets on final blows. After throwing a proximity knife, you gain increased melee regeneration until the knife explodes. Gain 500% additional base melee recharge rate while proximity knife remains unexploded. My problem with this exotic, so what? Do you kind of like, you have to like intentionally throw them like away from the enemy, but in a place you know that they're going to walk into so that it stays alive long enough for you to get the 500% regen for you to get like a new one back? Or what's going on here? I see places where it can work. I just don't think it's working in higher end content personally. Now, I will admit, I am not well versed with the Caliban's Hand. I've used most hunter exotics extensively. Caliban's Hand, I have not. I have very little experience with this exotic. In fact, I probably only equipped it a handful of times. So maybe there's something that other people know that I don't, because I've heard some people say it can be really, really solid. Although I can see it being useful in like lower end to mid tier content, I don't see it being useful in end game content. Like you're just go young Ahamkara's spine instead. It just seems way, way, way better. So I'll probably go C tier. On a different day, I can maybe put it in B tier. Again, if you're someone who's like, oh, Caliban's Hand is amazing, this guy just doesn't understand it, he doesn't know what he's talking about, that could be entirely true. I will completely admit that, okay? Could be entirely true. And if you're on the fence of like, you know, you're using this to determine what exotics you should be using, maybe go give it a try, right? Maybe that's one maybe you shouldn't take my word on. Gyrfalcon's Halberd, which is how you say it, by the way, Gyrfalcons, or I think Gyrfalcons is another way to say it. Gyrfalcons. If you hear someone say Gyrfalcons, you need to have a conversation with them because they need to go on google.com and look up how to pronounce words. Gyrfalcons, definitely an S tier exotic. In the current season, it's not actually that insane because we have the volatile flow seasonal mod, but y'all know me, I don't really assess things based on seasonal mods because seasonal mods have expiration dates. Gyrfalcons is a really solid exotic, and I think in certain situations, it can be better than Omnioculus, Graviton Forfeit, and 6 Coyote, especially in lower end content where it's really, really, really easy to get those final blows on volatile targets. And even in Grandmaster Nightfall situations, I think Gyrfalcons can still be pretty solid. Me personally, I would probably go Omnioculus or Forfeit or 6 Coyote in GMs because to me, Gyrfalcons is like the offensive void exotic, whereas the other three are like the defensive void exotics. So in situations where you want defense, survivability, you kind of want to shy away from Gyrfalcons a little bit more. But in situations like raids and stuff like that, ad clearing situations where you just want to like, you want everything to explode, Gyrfalcons is killer. Definitely an S tier exotic. How do you pronounce this one again? It's like Crypta something facade. Cytarachnes facade. I don't know if that's how you say it. It's something like that. Gain woven mail when activating grapple. Increased flinch resistance while woven mail is active. We don't really care about the flinch resistance in PvE. We're not really, you know, going for headshots with snipers in PvE a whole lot. However, woven mail is really, really good. However, how many times am I going to say however? You have to use the grapple grenade. And I know the grapple grenade is so fun. Not saying it's not fun. But if we're looking at effectiveness of different utilities and toolkits in PvE, the shackle grenade is insane. It's mind-bogglingly strong, which obviously you can't use the shackle grenade with this exotic. Additionally, there's so many easy ways to get woven mail on a hunter in PvE. The primary one being using the, I believe it's called Thread of Warding, where you get woven mail for picking up an orb of power. There's like 100 orbs of power on the ground at any given time in the current Destiny sandbox. You can easily get woven mail. You do not need an exotic helmet that requires you to give up shackle grenade in exchange for a grapple grenade to be able to get you woven mail, and you definitely don't care about the flinch resistance in PvE. So definitely a D tier. Finally, we have the, I always forget the name of these, the Speedloader Slacks. Does anyone else love the word slacks? I love that word. It's such a good word. If like, why ever call anything pants when you can just call them slacks? Lucky pants? Like lucky slacks. Come on. Slacks is such a good word. Dodging boosts reload speed, handling, and airborne effectiveness for you and nearby allies. While the buff is active, final blows and additional dodges increase the buff, strength, and refresh the timer, maxes out at 5 stacks. To me, this is just like better Dragon Shadow in a PvE context. Doesn't reload all your weapons right off the bat, obviously, but it has that same like neutral gun focus power fantasy. This is Dragon Shadow after leg day. Exactly. It's Dragon Shadow after slacks day. So I still don't think it's like great because like we said, Dragon Shadow is not really like super useful in PvE. So you could maybe just stick it in C tier, but like a little bit above Dragon Shadow. I actually played around with this exotic a lot at the beginning of Lightfall, and I actually liked it. Like the buff bonuses were very, very, very noticeable, and you can give them to your allies as well. So I'm honestly okay sticking this in B tier. I definitely don't think it's like an insane exotic, but like especially in any content other than like contest mode content, it's very easy to keep the buff up like at max stacks. It's easy to give to your allies, and and it feels really solid in a neutral game situation. And if you're using a subclass where, like, you know, maybe Stasis Hunter, where maybe you don't feel like running Frosties, maybe you don't feel like running Renewal Grasps, because at the end of the day, neither provide really insane benefits, and you just want more of like a neutral weapon, you know, neutral game weapon focused exotic, the Speedloader Slacks, good option. So this is my exotic PvE Hunter armor tier list. Again, like, honestly, this is just for fun. I'm not telling you which exotics to use and which ones to not use. Like, you can use it for a little bit of guidance if you want to. Realistically, you can move a lot of these exotics up, you know, plus or minus one tier, depending on your playstyle, depending on your experience with them. Like, none of this is set in stone by any means. I would say this top half of the bracket, this S tier, is pretty ironclad, but once you get down to the B through D tiers, things get like a little more muddled. Definitely can't move Omni down though. Omni is in its slot. You know, Omni definitely belongs up there. In fact, we probably need a few more. There we go. That's probably a little more accurate, to be honest. This is this is my final tier list. This is the official, put the Mactic stamp seal of approval on it. This is, you know, this is what we're looking at. So yeah,